Welcome, my friend, to another episode of the Chasing Poker Greatness podcast. As always, this is your host, the founder of ChasingPokerGreatness.com, Coach Brad Wilson. Today is Friday, which means we're about to have a philosophical conversation, and I am joined by my co-host, Duncan. Duncan, how you doing, sir?
Hello. And apparently, I just learned that we're rediscovering the 240p for those who are watching on the internets and the interwebs. I'm
Yeah,
currently traveling, and I just discovered that my laptop camera is not the best. So I apologize for that in advance to the listener and the viewer.
yes, for the podcast listener, it reminds me of watching TV at my grandparents' house in the 80s. Duncan's camera here. It's
I love it. I love it. You can see I don't have the background and stuff like that. So yeah, hopefully, we'll stick to the basics.
Yeah, not only is his camera not so great, I'm pretty sure he's recording this out of a closet somewhere. So it's the double whammy for production values.
Oh,
But for the podcast listener, they don't care. Doesn't affect them whatsoever. What
bulletproof.
is what is on the agenda for today? What's going to be the topic of discussion?
Absolutely. So we had an excellent recommendation by Steven on Twitter to perhaps talk about the relationships as a standalone, of course, but also more importantly as they relate to poker. And so today we're hoping to discuss what is it special about poker that could affect the relationships, how it affects them positively, negatively, what we can do to navigate and balance personal life and professional life. And again, when we're talking about relationships, of course, we will be extending to everything from family, to significant others, friends, that sort of thing.
Cool. Sounds like a topic that we can knock out in 7 or 8 minutes. Just relationships across the board. We're gonna destroy it. We're gonna solve it today on Philosophical Friday.
Yeah, that's right. Like all these philosophical problems, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So one way to start with this, I mean, there's several ways. Usually we start with, defining things. I guess we can give like a very brief definition of what we mean by a relationship. If when you hear the word relationship, what comes to mind?
Friendship, spending quality time with a specific person. In most cases, there's some responsibility on you as it relates to that person in some capacity, whether it be financial responsibility, emotional responsibility, some kind of responsibility there.
Right. Yes, our favorite word, right? And I like this. I like defining. That's why even things that sound so obvious, they're good to define. Like, I like to think of relationships through the lens of responsibility, right? Because again, we've covered the concept of responsibility, so a lot of things are going to be tied up. So let's start with, I guess, a big question, right? What is a good way to balance poker in relationships? And perhaps one way we can start, because obviously we can go in many different ways. Let's start for those who haven't already. Let's say somebody who starts with a blank slate, right? What are some criteria for choosing, let's say poker friendly partners or friends, and obviously the reason why we're doing this is sort of like a rhetorical question to see what are the elements that could help or disrupt a relationship. So let's say that somebody doesn't have a friend, what would be, or a partner, what would be a good way to choose them, so in order to be poker friendly in your mind?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the place that poker has in your life, right?
Mm-hmm.
If it's just hobby, recreational, then I don't think it's a big deal. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think that like just having the conversation about your hobbies and how you spend your time
Mm-hmm.
is probably just enough there. If you're a professional or if you have aspirations of becoming a professional poker player, then I think it matters a massive deal. I think that like you want to look for a partner who has a decent tolerance for risk,
Mm-hmm.
who has a high capacity for support
Mm-hmm.
in supporting their significant other, and also is open to the idea of having an occupation that's quote unquote outside the norm. I think those things are just quite important and probably um, yeah, I think it's probably a deal breaker if you don't have any of those 3 in a potential partner.
Absolutely, absolutely. And to add to that, first of all, we can perhaps summarize it that there needs to be some agreement in values. And you basically summarize what are some of those values be. The idea of, again, risk tolerance, the idea of realizing that it's a non-standard profession. So if they have some standards in their mind, that might be difficult. So and there is an interesting, I guess, philosophical distinction we can make, which is something I think we talked about. And if I recall, you mentioned it also in one of the previous podcasts. The idea that, understanding and acceptance are basically two different things. What do I mean by that? You can understand one person's position very well to the point that you respect it, what we can call essentially, compatibility of disagreement, but you may not accept it in the sense that it's not something that makes you comfortable, right? I mean, again, we're talking
Sure.
about broccoli and things like that. So I think this is very true in poker as well. When we say we're talking about the compatibility against, I guess, of values, that's what essentially we're referring to, right? I mean, understanding risk. This is something that the partner needs to understand, but not only understand it, but also accept it, like go to the next level, like feel comfortable with it. And of course, we cannot be angry to people who they don't like risk in the same way we tolerate it, for example.
Yeah, and I would say, like, another key is how curious they are
Mm-hmm.
about the game when you mention it to them, right? I think that, like, there's a lot of stigma as it relates to what other people perceive as gambling or what is gambling. That's just kind of passed on generationally. That these are just important conversations you need to have because
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about like a long-term relationship with a significant other, then their family also has to understand kind of what you're doing and the merits of it, because there can be other outside sources of pressure that get put on you through your significant other's family, that they put on them and then they put that on you, or
Mm-hmm.
they just have to deal with that by themselves, right? Which is a big burden and a big area of stress. So really it's just like open lines of communication with not only just your significant other, but then other parts of their family who may have questions about what you're doing or may have concerns or may just outright think you're a degenerate,
Mm-hmm.
terrible human being. That's just quite a significant challenge that is tough for relationships to take on. So, yeah, just need to be upfront with everyone about answer questions, and then do the best that you can to communicate what poker is, what being a professional poker player entails. Um, and yeah, I think that's you just have to do that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the word communication here twice at least. That's what I counted. And I think that's very relevant. And you also mentioned being honest, which I think is also extremely important. Sometimes people may prefer to sugarcoat things. And if I may, I think that honesty can solve a lot of problems. If you're being upfront with, I learned that from personal experience, right? If you're being upfront with your partner from the beginning, it's so much easier, to sort of like separate the relationships that don't work and those that could work, because you tell them ahead of time what the challenges are going to be, right? One way or another, a challenge is going to surface and you're going to have to deal with it no matter what. So by not being honest to your partner, you're not saving yourself, you're just pushing the problem later, and as a matter of fact, it's going to be even worse. So honesty and communication can actually be very, very, very useful and helpful, because you may even discover that you have more connection on the subject than you may have thought. I mean, my wife is a perfect example of that. I mean, she didn't know anything about poker when we started dating, and as a matter of fact, we share some sort of like a preconceived notion of what degenerate gambling is. But I was what you said, basically explain that maybe what you're doing is not degenerate gambling. And actually, as a matter of fact, right now she's a semi-professional poker player herself. She's finding success because she likes that aspect of the game. Her middle name is
Sure.
plus EV, but she likes that word plus EV. Like when it's the differences between negative EV and plus EV. If I was a negative EV gambler, she would have hated it as I hate it too. But she likes the plus EV aspect, and some people do. Not everybody does.
Yeah, and I think respect is also important too, and this
Mm-hmm.
is one that is a little bit more difficult to see, especially when you're in the early stages of relationship. And that is like, if there's a time when you're a professional poker player, you've got to go to work, you've got to play cards,
Hmm.
and that has to be a priority. It has to be prioritized. Can't be you know, just knocked down the ladder of importance where it's like, oh, you could play poker anytime, let's go see a movie, let's go out of town, like let's do X, Y, or Z, right? Like, it is an occupation, it is a job. You need to have a schedule, you need to show up, you need to put in volume and play. And you need a significant other that can respect that. And I think that, like, that boundary is one that, in anecdotal personal experience and anecdotal experience with coaching a bajillion different human beings who endeavor to play poker professionally, it's one that I see crossed very, very often, is that, um, what we do is not as respected as if you had to go into a place to go work for 8 or 10 hours, right? Just you they we need isolation, we need space to play. um and I think that, like, with flexibility comes these kind of these kind of situations that crop up, right? Because we can technically play whenever we want to. So yeah, I think that, like, just respect of space, respect of occupation, respect of profession,
Hmm.
all of that is also very, very necessary, very, very important for a healthy long-term relationship with a significant other when you're a professional poker player.
Absolutely. And you're making a very good case here that, poker is, you're basically addressing the elephant in the room, right? That poker is a very unique profession. And although, like, every profession has its own challenges, what's interesting about poker is that there's challenges that people haven't heard of or they haven't seen before, right? I mean, they expect a specific type of talent to deal with a boss or to deal with a coworker, right? There's different type of stuff that poker players have to deal with, which actually brings us to the next point. What are some typical challenges? And you have already mentioned a few. You have already mentioned risk. You have already mentioned the atypical career. What are some things that people should be ready to face when it comes to the relationship specifically? Things like late hours, variance and things like that. What comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think firstly it's probably downswing, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's
Very good.
losing money and how that affects the household. Going on a downswing, a prolonged downswing, the stress that that's going to create, not just with you, but then the stress that, as a poker player, transfers from you to your significant other. And that's another thing too, by the way, is compartmentalizing stress
Mm-hmm.
and work-related things. I think it's very unfair that poker players put that on their significant others, complain about how terrible things are on a daily basis, to their partner. I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's good for the relationship or healthy. I actually don't think it's very healthy for the professional poker player either. Um, so yeah, I think that that's going to be a big sticking point. It is just the downswing, the regular stress about monetary concerns.
Mm-hmm. And incidentally, you reminded me of something as you were talking about that. You're talking about stress and about discussing some things with your partner, and it reminded me. Do you think it helps, or is it necessary, and to what degree, for the partner to be a poker player, or at least be aware of how the game works?
I don't think it's necessary. I do think that understanding how the game works is important. I don't know that that's absolutely necessary either. I think that the biggest thing that you're looking for is a system of support, from the person that you spend the most of your time with on a regular basis. I think that if that's in place, then a lot of the other things just kind of naturally happen. And, like, if your partner is very supportive of what you do, and is your biggest fan and believes in you and all of those things, then I think that it's very important for us as poker players to, again, compartmentalize. Don't lash out. Don't transfer the stress and anxiety, the downsides of this occupation, to said significant other. I don't really think that that's fair. Just keep the work
So
at work, if you can.
very good, which is incidentally is a good advice for any job, right? It doesn't matter if you are an employee at Starbucks or you play poker. You definitely probably do not want to make quality time with your partner, you don't want to let work infiltrate into that quality time,
Right.
essentially,
Like,
right?
I mean, for the listener, just imagine how you feel when a bunch of problems are dumped onto you that you can't resolve at all. You have there's no possibility that you can resolve any of these problems, and somebody just drops 10 of them right in your lap, right?
Mhm.
It's probably not a very comfortable or fun or good feeling. It's probably one of helplessness. And yeah, so just look at things from the other perspective, basically.
Absolutely, and that's actually a very good heuristic, which is something we can talk about next. Just one thing that I wanted to mention, because you mentioned earlier, basically just now, that again, they don't have to be a poker player, which necessarily, but they have to be a good support system, with which I agree 100%. And the thing that crossed to my mind is that in order for somebody to be a good support system, if they're not a poker player, the bare minimum is that they need to, again, understand and eventually accept what is it that we do. So it sort of like ties back to the thing that we were talking about earlier, communication. It is so important, if they're not a poker player, but even if they are, to communicate to them what is it exactly that is happening, both in a grand scheme of things and at the granular level, if necessary. So at the very least, have this big picture of what is happening, right? So, and if they understand it, then there is no need for extra, conversation. Like if they understand it and they accept it, they can, and if they know what the word variance and downswing means, and it's part of the process, it's going to be as close to possible to being another day in the office. How did your day go? The usual. And then move on, right?
Yep,
So
for sure.
so it is important to, and I think that's where honesty comes into play. Again, like, tell your partner exactly what is that's going on. I mean, the more questions they ask you, the more you should be answering, but not overwhelming them with the details that don't matter. Like, what is the big picture? What is the things that they care about? Like again, finances, downswings, that's going to be something that they care about. You being stressed and perhaps moving that stress onto them, a frustration, all of these things. How do you expect them, excuse me, to deal in those situations? What would be the best way to be helpful, and vice versa for the thing that they do, of course.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
for sure.
So what are some heuristics? And again, I mean, I mentioned that earlier, that can be considered. What are some things that people can do, work on, consider to facilitate their relationships?
Uh, so I guess have to be more specific there. So like
Sure.
what? Yeah.
Yeah, so let's be specific. So let's say that we have a couple that they agree on the basic values of life, which means, but then a poker is new to the significant other. So what would be some good heuristic, something? And you've mentioned some of those things already. Like, be honest with it. Explain it to the communication, honesty. There's a couple of things. What are some things that people can try? Some actionable things that people can try in order to help their relationship. And also, what are some things that people can avoid? Like you mentioned, another thing too, don't load or unload, I should say, all of the negativity of the poker into the significant other. That would be a heuristic. So what are some things they can do, first of all, to help them understand what poker is, and what are some things they can do to avoid the disasters, the proverbial disasters?
Yeah, I don't know. To the first part of your question,
Sure.
I actually don't know. If it's someone that you're struggling to explain just what poker is to a significant other, I think that like sometimes, yeah, I don't know
Mhm.
effectively how to communicate that in a way that just automatically resonates and makes sense to somebody who's outside of the game. I think that just I think that you should be professional. I
Mhm.
think that's maybe the biggest thing is that like other people can see professionalism, they can sense it, and so like when you're a professional, I think that just gives confidence in your significant other, even if they don't understand exactly what's going on. As long as
Mhm.
you're showing up, you're being a pro, they can see like, oh wow, like I see how hard they work. I see
Mhm.
how much they study. I see how much energy and effort they put into taking care of their body, their mind, their spirit, uh, their health, just in general. all of these things I think really, really, really matter and move the needle. So I would really just start there. Just be a pro and show them, what being professional is all about. And then it's really hard to lack confidence in another human being. Like you
Hmm.
see them wake up, go to the gym, meditate for 10 to 20 minutes a day, just drink drink green juice every day, just eat all the right things, just fuel yourself in a positive way, and then study, work hard, like, and then grind. I mean, it's really, really hard, right? Like it would be very hard for me to imagine someone who follows, like, say, Patrick Leonard
Hmm.
on Instagram and be like, "Oh, I don't see how this guy's a pro. I don't understand."
Right.
Like, it's very, very obvious that when you enter Patrick Leonard's space, this dude is a pro's pro.
Hmm.
Um, and it's just very, very obvious. So that's where I would start. Like the first
Right.
heuristic, and it's something that you can control, right? This is within your own control as a poker player, and something that, like, we should all be striving to do on a daily basis anyway.
Very, very well said. And there's like at least like two gems in there. I mean that I can remember as we're having this conversation. And the first one thing is that confidence is paramount and in building that professionalism that you're describing about. And this ties to a philosophical idea that can be summarized as follows: sometimes it doesn't matter what you say; it matters how you say it, and that can actually be very relevant. Now, that is not to say that we can BS people out of everything or anything like that, but I'm actually talking about substance here. If you are a professional, if you're building a professional framework and that which builds you confidence, then the people can actually outsource what is it that you really do to your
Sure.
confidence. So they can say, well, what he just said went way above my head, but at least they seem to have their house in order, right? So they seem to know that about themselves. And I feel chill about that. The same way that when you ask somebody what they do for a living, and then you may not understand what is it that they do, but you can get the sense, okay, this person is important, in what they're doing. He can be valuable to society, which actually ties to another gem, essentially, that you alluded to. By being a professional, it ties to the very old know thyself. Before you're able to explain anything to anybody, you first need to know it, understand it yourself, right? So I know that might sound like something which is completely weird to some listeners, but before you try to describe to your partner what is it that you do, ask yourself, can I actually describe it to myself in a way that I say, oh yeah, that's so great what I'm doing, right? Because a lot of people, and I see that with a lot of students who have a lot of aspirations, they come to me and they have all of these weird dreams about poker, which usually have to do with money. I want to get rich quickly or something like that. But they don't have a thread or an understanding of what exactly poker is. So like, if you cannot articulate it yourself in a way that you understand it and it makes you feel proud about it, is what you do, which again goes back to the confidence we're talking about, the professionalism, right? The professionalism is the manifestation of what exactly is that you do. If you're a professional, it means you have figured out already in your head how to do it, so you manifest it into action. And that's the second point that you're trying to make, which again ties to the know thyself idea, which I think is very important. If you cannot, put it in words yourself, it's going to be very, very difficult to explain it to a partner. So one heuristic would be try to explain to yourself first before
Mhm.
you explain to your partner, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think that what other people kind of see in your journey, I think is important as well. And I was just thinking about the CPG Wolf program,
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the people who are in the coaching for profit program that I run, they have families, right? They have people in their lives who depend on them. Some of them have full-time jobs, some of them have careers, some of them are full-time poker players or pros. And I would say that to a person who's in the Wolf program, their significant others will see that they're putting in, 10 to 15 hours a week just in study, just in learning, in group formal coaching sessions, in targeted homework, in all of these different areas. And they have systems of accountability. They have a system of support. They just have all of these different frameworks in place. that also give confidence in what somebody's doing or what their significant other is doing with their life force, with their energy, right? It's like, oh, they have like basically a team, they have accountability, they, they have like all of these coaching sessions every single week, right? And I think all of that matters, right? Life is a lot more difficult as, a lone wolf out there who's playing poker by yourself with no system of support, no coaches, no anything. And I would say too that, like, if you are a lone wolf, no systems of support, like, you should probably seek to resolve that. Find a community of people that you can relate to, find coaches that can help you upgrade areas of your life that in your heart of hearts are lacking. All of these things, they do come with being a pro. They come with the territory. And as it relates to your relationships, I think that all of that just carries a lot of weight.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as you're going through these things, you reminded me also and another question, which is, you as a poker player, since we're also talking about heuristics, what would be some things that you, if you were to talk to your partner right now, to put you on on the hot seat, or hypothetically, or bring yourself in the past with some of the conversations, what are some of the things that you would expect from your partner, or it would be nice if you had them?
I don't know. I have most of them personally.
I know
So
that's why I'm saying
yeah,
putting you in the
the
past, right?
thing.
Because I do have with my wife too. But what would be like some things to ask retroactively?
Well, I think that, let me look at this from a different perspective. I
Please.
think, like, things to look for, I think that could be danger or trouble.
Hmm.
I think any kind of contempt for what you do, how you spend your time, I think that that's like a very bad sign in your relationship. If they have contempt for you playing poker, if they have contempt for you, this is related to like eye rolling. This is related to just, all the things, the
Hmm. Right.
contemptible mannerisms and words and things of that nature. So I think that, like, that's something that, like, is exceptionally difficult to resolve in a significant other and is likely going to come down to like poker or them. I think that
Right.
that's ultimately what that will boil down to. Um, but yeah, to answer your question, things, I'm not really sure. I think that, like, just someone who listens, someone who
Right.
cares, and
Exactly.
someone who just supports you and encourages you to keep moving forward.
And I think that's not only a great answer, but it illustrates that it doesn't have to be something specific. Oh, I want, a wife or a husband that, they can listen to my bad beats. Like, because many people think that maybe that's a good, you go into the crux of the things, which is the philosophical connection, the agreement in the values, somebody who listens, right? Somebody who
And
listens is a good
trust you.
partner.
Yeah. Trust is another big one.
Trust.
Listens
Hmm.
and trust that, even if you are having a bad day, even if you're having a bad week, they trust that, you're going to keep forging on ahead and that everything will eventually be okay. I think ultimately that's just huge in relationships.
Absolutely. And notice how this sort of like approach permeates across different professions, right? I mean, somebody who's a good listener, somebody who's trusting, that can be helpful to other professions as well. The only place where poker deviates is that, we do something different and we have to explain how that works. But as long as, a good framework is being built on values that usually have to do, some of them have to do with poker, but most of them probably don't, then it's so much easier to go from there.
Right. And I think the expectation of most people is to have like some sort of process or framework in place that manages you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Manages your time, tells you when to show up, what to do. You have specialty, whatever it is, that you do in your occupation. With poker, you've got to manage yourself, right? Which to me is, again, it's kind of paramount that you manage your time well, you treat everything as a professional, that you are the one who in place who is responsible for your career, and you're taking appropriate actions as related to your career. I think that could help bridge the gap a little bit from, uh, traditional career to professional career as it is uh, seen from your significant other.
Absolutely, absolutely, very, very well said. And so So to start, closing it up and lighten the mood, maybe a little bit, would you say that relationships are generally harder for poker players? Of course, that's an impossible question to answer, but just for fun, do you think that we face a bigger challenge than the average professional out there?
I think that the challenge is in finding the right partner.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's not more challenging than another
Right.
occupation. I think in some ways it's more freeing and less challenging. I think that you can spend more quality time together. You have more
Right.
flexibility in your schedule to do
Right.
things. I think there are a lot of benefits to being a professional poker player, but the thing that you have to be very wise about is, you know, who you choose to who you choose as a significant other, who you choose to spend time with, who you choose to invest energy in. I think that that is maybe the most important choice that you can ever make in your entire life. So yeah, I don't think that it's harder. I think in a lot of ways it's easier and more fun and more fulfilling. But the first thing is, you got to choose right.
I would actually agree with that. I don't think there's anything significantly harder or easier about the game. It's just another challenging aspect of life. Life is challenging as it is. It's not there's like a book of life, how to live our lives, and we just follow the procedure. So we figure it out as we go. And I think it all comes down to how much we ourselves have figured things out for ourselves before we even talk about relationships, like how well we have internalized those things. And again, you talked about these things earlier, how professional we are, how honest we are, how well we understand it, explain it to ourselves, how well we know ourselves before we even go ahead and discuss it with a partner. And I would say that the more well we perform in those areas, the more we know ourselves, the more professional we are, the more time we spend, studying and figuring out the needs that we have, the need for a support system, for a community, all of these things. The more we have, quote unquote, figured those things out, the easier it becomes to know exactly what we need and find the better partner, or the good partner. And this is similar for other professions as well.
Right. And for the poker player side too, I think it's very important to spend quality time with your significant other, to genuinely be present when they're in the room, to listen to their problems, to listen to the things that they're dealing with. Just don't let the game just shut you down, and not want to communicate with other people, not want to be there. You need to be a support system as well, on the other side of the coin. And sometimes, maybe you have to play a long night. Maybe, you are at a tournament series for a week or 2 weeks or whatever that may be. But whenever you get home, you need to be home. You need to spend time with your family. You need to spend time with your significant other. And I think that that's just another potential weakness as it relates to poker players and their relationships, is they let the game consume just every single second of their existence on Earth, when you really need to shine the light on your significant other. You need to just support them in the same way that they're supporting you. I think that needs to be reciprocated. Everything that I mentioned from the other side, I think the professional poker player must reciprocate as well.
I agree. And you actually answered the question I didn't even ask, which I think is very relevant, and actually much harder and deeper. What are some of the things that we should be prepared for, to give to our partner, that we may not necessarily think about because they're so obvious for us, right? Because it's very difficult to put yourself in another person's shoes, which is incidentally why it's so helpful to share values, because if you share values, it's easier to put yourself in their shoes. So what are some
Shouldn't be hard for a poker player. That's kind of what we do, right?
right?
Putting ourselves in other people's shoes all the time.
Exactly. Very good. Exactly. So what are some, let's actually explore that a little bit, because it's a very interesting and difficult one. Again, it's easy sometimes to know what you want, but it's a little bit harder to know, what the other person wants. And, you have to ask questions. You have to see their sides. What are some things which, notoriously, well, I shouldn't say notoriously, but what are some things that poker players should be careful about. Like, for instance, yabbing about bad beats, we know that that's a bad thing to do, right? In general, of course, some people may like it, to each his own. But what are some things that we, as poker players, we need to explore with our partner to make sure that this is not something that can bad. And you said, like, don't bring all of that stress at home, from work at home. What are some things that we should consider?
I mean, I think that it's probably subjective and
Mm-hmm.
depends on person to person, but uh, I mean, just a thing that you could do is just read books on communication and how to effectively communicate, how
I
to
like it.
ask the right questions, how to like understand one another's needs, and then have some sort of plan to meet those needs. That to me is just the most sensible way. Is just improve your communication skills and figure out, you know, more. You just learn more about one another, how we think, how we behave, how each other's central nervous system responds to different stress and different stimulus, and then just kind of go from there.
Education, and I think that's very important. And education, let me just give a brief heuristic of which I think it could be relevant. You can educate yourself externally, right? Read the books, and there's a lot of literature, but there's also another type of education, the hands-on education. Learn about your partner. So this is a very weird profession for so many people from the outside. So one of the things that could make sense, especially if the values are being shared among the people in the relationship, would be, what would you expect of me? That would be a good heuristic question, right? So instead of guessing what is the thing that could actually bother our significant other, I think we can translate it into education and ask them, what are some things that I do, like, when you see me super stressed, what is that I do that perhaps I can work on? Or when, things like, the downsides you mentioned earlier, how does that make you feel? What is the thing that you're worried about? Because perhaps there can be a solution, like, specific accounts just for poker, which is a good advice in and of itself, but you can find some solutions based on what are the expectations of the partner without having to guess them. You just ask them. That would be the heuristic, just
Yeah,
literally.
just don't be lazy, right?
Right,
Like
right.
just don't be lazy, and treat it like anything else. Treat it in the same way that you treat poker. Just a journey of learning and discovery and experimenting and education.
Absolutely. You reminded me of the late Dusty Schmidt Leatheras. Shout out to him with his book, Treating Your Poker Like a Business. One of the, I don't know if it's one of the best poker books ever written, but definitely one of the best poker titles I've heard.
Definitely a good title.
Yeah, it is. It is a business, and you have to treat it with the utmost respect in that regard.
Of course. I mean, in the same way that, like, if you own a business and you start dating somebody and they come to your business and it's just in total disarray, there's just papers everywhere, products are not organized, the people who are supposed to be managed are just doing their own thing. It probably doesn't send a great message about who you are and how you run things. So if you look at poker through that lens, I think that, like, being a pro, being responsible, all this stuff just makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, any final thoughts? I think we covered a lot of ground.
I don't have any final thoughts. I think if you don't have any more questions or any more
No, I know. I think,
follow up points, then
yeah, no, I think we covered a lot of things, and I was wondering, like, where can people, share their stories? Because again, we like to hear from you. That's something that I noticed that people were doing on the village lately. They're sharing stories, and I really like that. It's really
sure.
nice to see all the different perspectives and how people are doing in.
Yeah, and if there were any points that I neglected to mention or that you disagree with
Right.
or stories that you would like to share, yeah, greatnessvillage.com. Hop in the Slack community. You can also follow Duncan on YouTube at Why Alex Beats Bobby, Ask the Math Doctor on Twitter, and at CPG Podcast on Twitter. But would love to hear all of your thoughts, all of your questions, all of your stories in the village. So hop in there.
Absolutely, and it's been a pleasure talking to you, man, as always.
Yeah, you too. make your way out of the broom closet over the
I'll,
next week.
I'll try. I don't know about the next week, but the week after that, it's gonna be better. I think.
All right, man. Take care.
Take care.